Let me tell you something about redemption, honey. It sounds pretty, like a clean white dress after a storm. But underneath, the mud clings to your skin. It's been 3 years. 3 long years since Jasmine Brooks, just a ghost of a girl living under the L train tracks, found her way into the gilded cage of the Stone family. And look at her now. Bless her heart. She's 20 years old, driving a polished black car through the expensive streets of Lincoln Park, coming home to a mansion that smells of old money and fresh lilies. She's not just thriving, she's soaring. She's a college student, excelling in social work, and the associate director of the Margaret Stone Foundation. That's a title, darling. She gave a presentation this afternoon, speaking about the new, massive shelter the foundation is opening. A beacon of hope built on Catherine Stone's fortune. Jasmine felt that rare, powerful surge of safety tonight. The kind of safety she hadn't tasted since she was a little girl holding her Grandma Rose's hand. She earned this. She survived. She convinced herself that the darkness was finally behind her. But you know how trauma works, right? It's not something you just lock away in the attic. It hides in the walls. Jasmine could be standing under a crystal chandelier, surrounded by security guards and marble floors, yet she still checks the locks on her bedroom door 5 times before she sleeps. She hides her phone in specific places, constantly rotates her passwords, and treats her old, worn-out backpack from the street, which she keeps stashed deep in a hidden closet, like a poisonous, dangerous secret. Because she knows the truth. The Jasmine Brooks they see today is a carefully constructed facade. When she was 16, desperate, starving, she did things in the shadows. Things she had to do for the collective of kids who became her family down in those cold, echoing tunnels. She ran packages. She served as a lookout. She was loyal to Ghost, the fierce young leader who ruled that dark kingdom. And then she left. She vanished, abandoning her post, vanishing into the light of the Stone's wealth. That isn't just surviving. That's betrayal in the brutal economy of the streets. The money, the comfort, the love of Catherine Stone. It's all built on a terrifying silence. A silence that screams in her vivid, sweat-soaked nightmares every night. Tonight, as she pulls into the stone driveway, the mansion looks like a fortress. She breathes a deep sigh of relief, believing the walls are high enough to keep the past out. What she doesn't realize, what no one dares to tell her, is that the debts she owed the tunnels are not forgiven, and the ones who survived her absence have finally tracked the scent of her success. She walks into the safety of the house, unaware that the game is over. The price of her second chance is about to be violently demanded, and the collector is already standing in the shadows. Part 2. The Shadow from the Tunnels. Jasmine spent the next morning at the Foundation's newest acquisition, a vast, derelict warehouse in the near West Side, slated to become the largest youth shelter the city had ever seen. The air inside smelled of dust and damp concrete, a nostalgic, unsettling smell that made her skin prickle. She walked the perimeter, notebook in hand, her sensible wool coat feeling like a costume amidst the construction debris. This place was her proof. 3 years ago, she was the debris. Now, she was managing the vision. She paused near the loading dock, studying a blueprint that showed the future kitchen layout. The light filtering through the high, broken windows was weak, casting long, fractured shadows. For a moment, she was utterly alone, absorbed in the complex joy of creation. A sound, not of the wind, but of deliberate movement, shattered the silence. It was a slow, deliberate scrape of a boot on grit, coming from the shadowed corner where the old freight elevator cage rested. Jasmine's heart hammered a sudden, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She spun around, the breath catching sharp and cold in her throat. Standing there, partially obscured by the iron filigree of the elevator shaft, was Ghost. He hadn't changed. Not really. He wore the streets like a second skin. A heavy, ripped denim jacket, dark jeans, and high, worn boots. His eyes, the color of wet slate, held the same unsettling intensity she remembered from the tunnels, but now overlaid with a cold, predatory focus. "Jasmine Brooks," he said, his voice dropping heavy and low in the cavernous space. The sound of her full name, spoken by him, felt like an accusation. Paralyzed, Jasmine could only stare, her fingers crushing the edge of the blueprint. This wasn't a nightmare. This was physical, immediate terror. All the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself evaporated, leaving her exposed and 16 again. "Get out of here," she managed, her voice a strained whisper, desperate to reassert the power of her new identity. "This is Foundation property. You can't be here." Ghost pushed off the wall, taking one slow, confident step into the faint light. He smiled, a thin, cruel twist of his lips that exposed only his upper teeth. "You really think those rich patrons gave you a whole new identity, didn't you? Gave you a white coat and a clean slate," he mocked, gesturing to her expensive attire. "Funny thing about debts, Jasmine. They don't disappear just because you move to a better zip code. They accrue interest." He advanced 2 more steps, forcing her back toward the wall. "You owe us," he stated plainly. "You owe the people you used to call family, the people you threw away the second a rich woman offered you a hot meal." Jasmine tried to anchor herself in the present, remembering Catherine's trust, the work she was doing. Helping. This building. Ghost. This is for kids just like us. You need to leave. I can get you help, but not if you threaten. "Help?" Ghost laughed, a bitter barking sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "We don't need charity, Brooks. We need resources. And you're sitting on a mountain of them." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint, familiar scent of concrete dust and stale rain clinging to his jacket. His gaze dropped to the Foundation logo stitched onto her coat sleeve, then back up to her eyes. "Here's the deal," he continued, his tone shifting to cold business. "We need immediate operating capital. You get me $10,000 cash, within 48 hours. No tracing, no questions. And then, we need access." "Access to what?" Jasmine felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. "To the Foundation's logistics. The supply chains, the empty dorms, the cash flow. You were my lieutenant for nearly 3 years. You know the protocols for running packages, for being the lookout. Now, you're our lookout on the inside. You divert supplies. You flag useful assets." Jasmine shook her head violently, the movement making her dizzy. "No, absolutely not. That's stealing. That destroys everything Catherine built. That destroys everything I built." Ghost's expression hardened. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It looked old and worn, creased along the edges. "I didn't ask for your permission. I asked for your cooperation," he corrected, holding the paper loosely between 2 fingers. "You think I came here without insurance? You think I forgot everything we did down there?" He unfolded the paper. It was a dense, almost manic scrawl of symbols and abbreviations, the coded journal entry he kept during their time on the streets. He ran his thumb over a specific section, marked in thick black ink. "Remember the night on the Blue Line? The assault on the collector? You were watching the track, right? You told us when the police patrols had been delayed by the switching glitch," Ghost recited, his voice dangerously soft. "The police reports say the collector fell during the confrontation. We know the truth. You were a fully aware accomplice. A felony charge, Jasmine. 3 to 5 years, minimum." The cold dread turned into paralyzing nausea. She remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the absolute silence she maintained afterward. She had buried that memory so deep, it felt like it happened to another person. If I walk that little piece of paper and my testimony down to the precinct, or better yet, straight to your beloved Catherine Stone, Ghost threatened, leaning in, it won't just be you that goes down. It will be the foundation, the scandal, the fact that the associate director is a felonious accomplice. Everything she believes about you, Jasmine, gone. He gave her the ultimatum again, his gaze unwavering. $10,000, and open the gate for the lost ones, or I start the clock on your perfect life. Jasmine swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of fear. The warehouse suddenly felt suffocating. She knew he wasn't bluffing. She was trapped. I need time, she choked out. 48 hours, Ghost confirmed, stepping back. Don't disappoint me again, Brooks. Disloyalty is an expensive lesson. He turned to leave, melting back into the shadows of the freight elevator shaft. Jasmine watched him go, her body rigid, convinced the immediate danger had passed. Then, just as he was about to disappear completely, Ghost paused. He didn't look back at her. Instead, he reached into his other pocket, retrieved something small, and dropped it onto the rough concrete floor right at the spot where she had been standing seconds before. The object was tiny, cracked around the edges, and slightly faded with age. It was a photograph, a grainy, black-and-white image of Margaret Stone's mother, Grandma Rose, smiling beneath a floppy hat. Jasmine's mind went blank with horror. She had tucked that exact photo inside the lining of her jewelry box, a private, deeply personal keepsake, in the secured master suite of the Stone mansion. She stared at the image, then back at the empty, silent shadows where Ghost had stood. Her knees buckled. He hadn't just tracked her down. He hadn't just found leverage from the past. Ghost had already been inside the fortified walls of the Stone mansion, proving that nothing, not even her own bedroom, was safe. The threat wasn't if he could destroy her life. The threat was that he was already operating within it, turning her haven into a prison. She now had to choose between funding a criminal enterprise and losing her identity, and the choice had to be made while Ghost stalked the halls of her family home. Jasmine felt the immediate chilling realization. This wasn't a demand. It was a siege, and Ghost already had a key to the fortress. Jasmine found herself trapped in a cycle of meticulous theft and desperate paranoia. The diversion had to be small enough to escape the quarterly audit, yet large enough to appease the mounting hunger of Ghost. She started with the Foundation's maintenance funds, altering vendor receipts and routing small amounts, 3,000 here, 5,000 there, into untraceable prepaid accounts, all while maintaining a facade of diligence so rigorous it bordered on mania. She was dismantling her own life, brick by painful brick. Sleep offered no respite. The nightmares intensified, shifting from abstract fears of the streets to sharp, specific visions of Ghost standing silently at the foot of her bed, his face obscured by the low light of the mansion. She checked the locks on her windows and doors 5 times a night. Her coursework suffered. The complex policy reports she usually tackled with enthusiasm were now reduced to half-finished pages stained with cold coffee and the residue of sleepless guilt. "Jasmine, you seem exhausted," Catherine observed one rainy Tuesday morning, watching her protégé push an untouched plate of fruit salad away. "You've lost weight. The stress of the new shelter is enormous, I know, but we can't have you burning out." The concern in Catherine's voice was warm, authentic, and utterly corrosive. Jasmine couldn't meet her eyes. She felt the heavy weight of the secret pressing her down, making every movement a calculated effort in deceit. "I'm fine, Catherine. Just pulling all-nighters for the Urban Studies final," Jasmine lied smoothly. the skill honed by years of necessary deception on the streets now serving to destroy the safety she had gained. "Please, sweetheart," Catherine insisted gently. "Take a day. The Foundation can survive without you for 24 hours. Jasmine shook her head, a tremor running through her hands. If she stopped moving, if she took a day off, the silence would fill with the roar of her past. She had to stay close to the accounts, monitoring every security protocol she had deliberately weakened, knowing that Ghost might exploit them at any second. "I'm more useful here," Jasmine insisted, retreating to the solitude of her makeshift Foundation office in the mansion's conservatory. "I'm only useful here if I can protect you from me," she thought bitterly. While Jasmine fought her invisible battle, the first subtle tremors of a different seismic event began to shake the bedrock of the Stone Empire. The initial delivery arrived late that afternoon via a specialized high-security courier. A thick portfolio sealed with the insignia of a boutique litigation firm known for its aggressive, bordering on predatory financial law. Catherine, accustomed to receiving routine legal queries and donation requests, opened the package casually in her Lincoln Park office, the vast skyline of Chicago spreading indifferently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The contents were anything but routine. It was not a lawsuit. It was a targeted demand for disclosure, couched in the language of a formal governmental audit request focused exclusively on the Foundation's tax exemptions relating to the land purchased 30 years prior. The request wasn't broad or clumsy. It was surgical, demanding specific, highly technical valuation reports and affidavits from the early days of Stone Real Estate's formation. Catherine's blood ran cold. Only one person had this granular archival knowledge of her firm's foundational history and the specific legal loopholes she had exploited. The man who had lost the acquisition bid to her in a bitter, public spectacle. Daniel Thorne. Thorne wasn't interested in money. He was interested in annihilation. She immediately placed a call to Barrister Solutions, a crisis management firm specializing in high-profile corporate defense. By the time they arrived, 20 minutes later, Catherine had already retrieved every relevant foundational document from her main office safe, her movements sharp and focused, driven by a fear she hadn't felt in decades. "This is not a fishing expedition, Ms. Stone," the lead barrister, Julian Vance, stated gravely, reviewing the documents Thorne had submitted. Vance's fingers flew over the technical language. "This is an opening salvo. He's not just questioning your tax status, he's questioning the ethical integrity of the very land the Foundation is built upon." The deal was clean, Catherine asserted, her voice hard. It was aggressive, yes, but legally ratified. Vance gave her a weary look. Legally ratified and ethically clean are not the same thing in a court of public opinion, especially when you are running a charity founded on redemption. Thorne is using the Foundation as the lever to bring down the Stone firm. He wants a media circus, a political scandal. We need to identify his weakness and fast. Vance's team spent the next 72 hours dissecting the documents, running risk assessments against 3 decades of Stone Real Estate's transactions. The conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. "We keep coming back to the acquisition of the North Side lots in 1987, Ms. Stone," Vance reported, projecting an old, faded map onto Catherine's office screen. "That deal was the seed money for everything you built. It was also the most litigated and ethically questionable transaction of your career. If Thorne can manage to introduce doubt about the original valuation, perhaps evidence of pressure or undisclosed financial incentives, the entire structure collapses." Catherine stood before the screen, watching the faded boundaries of the long-ago property burn into her vision. She remembered the urgency, the ruthlessness, the conviction that the ends justified the means. That single act had built her empire, but she knew, deep down, that it had always been vulnerable. She had chosen profit over people, burying the consequence in mountains of wealth and good deeds. "Where are those original documents kept?" Vance asked, interrupting her painful memory. "The sealed appraisals, the full contracts, the internal strategy memos related to the valuation?" Catherine swallowed hard, tasting the metallic fear of impending ruin. She had buried them so deep in a secure, climate-controlled vault in the sub-basement of the mansion, accessible only by a single biometric scan and an iron key she carried perpetually around her neck, hidden beneath her expensive silk blouse. "They are not in this office," she managed, her voice tight. "They are at home." It was time to face the foundation of her fear. Hours later, the mansion quiet, Catherine descended into the house's deepest sub-basement. The air grew stale and cool, thick with the scent of concrete and history. She pressed her hand to the biometric scanner, and the heavy steel vault door hissed open, revealing a small, stark room lined with specialized archival boxes. She reached beneath her blouse, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the cool, aged brass key resting against her sternum. She retrieved the iron key and inserted it into the lock of a massive, heavily reinforced archival box marked simply 1987. North Side Project. The lock turned with a grinding, protesting sound. 30 years of silence being shattered in the deep basement. Catherine lifted the heavy lid, the interior filled with stacks of yellowed, brittle paper. She reached in, her hand brushing against the brittle corner of the crucial document. The proof that would either save or destroy her life, her family, and her foundation. Just as her fingers closed around the file, the light on the wall panel in the small vault flickered, a momentary, inexplicable power disruption that plunged the room into a heavy, suffocating darkness. Catherine froze, her heart seizing, her hand deep inside the box of secrets, realizing that even in this fortified vault, something outside was already intruding, proving the network was not secure, proving Ghost was already closer than she could have possibly imagined. The power surged back, blinding Catherine with the sudden sharp glare of the single overhead bulb. She snatched the heavy file from the box, its brittle pages crackling like dry ice beneath her fingers. Her panic was not just fear, it was a cold, absolute realization of failure. Ghost had found the weak point in the firewall of her wealth, and it was the very fear she had been protecting for 3 decades. The intrusion was proof of his proximity, the darkness a physical manifestation of her encroaching ruin. Catherine secured the vault and hurried upstairs, the silence of the mansion feeling less like peace and more like a vacuum before an explosion. She carried the file, the history of the stone fortune, like a volatile bomb, acutely aware that she was no longer merely defending her empire, but the life she had desperately tried to build for Jasmine. Meanwhile, anxiety was a lead weight in Jasmine's chest, heavy enough to warp her posture. Her failure to decisively handle Ghost was now a sickness leaching into her routine. She had provided him with a narrow, temporary window, a digital key to bypass the exterior security logs for a 6-hour window, an act of self-betrayal she could scarcely admit. Her only hope was to neutralize the source of Ghost's leverage, the information itself. She sought sanctuary in the vast, shadowed expanse of the stone library, the scent of leather and old paper usually a comfort. Tonight, the heavy volumes seemed to judge her. She needed to understand why Catherine was reacting with such disproportionate fear to the legal challenges. She pulled up the digitized records of the 1980s real estate projects, specifically the Northside acquisition. The official records were sanitized, mentioning only complex eminent domain proceedings and swift compliance. But the gaps were enormous, the documentation thin where it should have been dense. Jasmine focused on the list of displaced residents, the numbers blurring under her intense scrutiny. A soft, shuffling sound interrupted her. "Catherine." Jasmine flinched, spinning around. Margaret Stone stood in the doorway, illuminated by the single desk lamp. The elder woman was wearing an embroidered silk dressing gown, her 80-year-old face drawn tight, but her eyes held a clarity that Jasmine hadn't seen in months. Margaret was lucid. "Margaret, I was just looking for a book on urban planning," Jasmine lied, her voice tight. Margaret didn't acknowledge the lie. She glided into the room, her movements slow but deliberate, stopping beside Jasmine. Her gaze was fixed not on the screen, but far beyond, into the past. "It wasn't about the land, Catherine," Margaret whispered, her voice a reedy rasp. "It was about the people." Jasmine felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "I'm Jasmine, Margaret." Margaret reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched Jasmine's cheek, her fingers icy. "No, you have her eyes, that hunger for purpose. You must stop building the foundation on the sand that swallowed them whole." Jasmine dared not move, afraid of shattering the fragile moment of memory. "Who did the sand swallow, Margaret?" Margaret leaned closer, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint and age. The next words were not fragmented ramblings. They were a direct, precise confession that tore open the ethical foundation of everything Jasmine held dear. 57 families. Not units, families. They were promised relocation, but the money vanished. Catherine's lawyers used their own fear against them, forced them out into the winter. Margaret recounted, the shame palpable in her tone. And the two men, the two honest surveyors who tried to report the environmental contamination before the demolition, they took the money, $30,000 each, and silence forever. 30 years of silence, bought with guilt. Jasmine staggered back a step, bracing her hand against the heavy mahogany desk. The sheer scale of the historical wrong pulsed like an open wound. Catherine hadn't just acquired property dubiously. She had actively ruined dozens of lives and corrupted others to bury the truth. The foundation, the shining monument to redemption, was literally founded upon the destruction of 57 vulnerable families. Jasmine felt the paralyzing weight of the impossible choice. Ghost was threatening to expose Jasmine's small personal crimes, but doing so would save Catherine from the truth of her monumental corporate sins. Yet, Margaret's revelation meant that Ghost, in his dark, chaotic way, was an agent of justice, aiming at the rotten core. To protect Catherine was to endorse the foundational lie. Margaret squeezed her hand, her eyes swimming with sudden tears. "The Stone name is tainted, dear. Always has been. The foundation? It's a beautiful building, but it sits on sin. You have to tell them the cost. You have to." Just as quickly as the lucidity had arrived, it vanished. Margaret blinked slowly, her expression clouding over. "Oh dear, did I miss my show? Is the coffee cold?" She turned and shuffled out of the library, leaving Jasmine utterly alone in the crushing realization of the moral debt the Stone family owed. Jasmine knew with sickening certainty that Ghost was right. The Stones were thieves who owed the streets, and she, Jasmine, had given the thief the key to the castle. Overwhelmed, she stumbled out of the library and down the hall, driven by a desperate need to find Catherine and confess everything. Her guilt, the compromises, the truth about the 57 families. She found Catherine's study door ajar. The room was immaculate, save for one jarring item placed neatly upon the large antique desk, a faded, yellowed newspaper clipping from the Chicago Tribune, date stamped November 1987. It detailed the controversial displacement of residents from the North Side project, listing the exact low-income apartment complex where the 57 families had resided. Superimposed over the clipping, secured by a single, rusty thumbtack, was a small, handwritten note on rough brown paper, the script tight and angular, Ghost's undeniable signature. The note was short, brutal, and addressed to Catherine Stone. I know the cost. Pay the debt. $100,000. Or the foundation crumbles. Ghost had not just used the security access Jasmine had provided. He had found and synthesized the historical crime that Daniel Thorne was attacking, proving he had access to Thorne's high-level legal research. Jasmine's panicked attempts at placation had given Ghost the tool to ally himself with the Stone family's oldest, most devastating enemy, turning the Foundation's foundational lie into a weapon of mass destruction aimed directly at Catherine. Jasmine's breath hitched. A silent, terrible gasp caught in her throat. She snatched the clipping, her fingers tearing the brittle paper. The $100,000 demand proved the escalation was immediate and irreversible. Ghost had moved past simple extortion. He was declaring war on the very structure of the Stone's power. The silence of the house was suddenly interrupted by a jarring sound. Not the familiar ring of the doorbell, but the sharp, insistent vibration of Catherine's rarely used private office landline. It rang only for Thorne's legal team, the police, or absolute financial emergencies. Jasmine stared at the phone, then at the clipping in her hand, the paper rattling as her body began to shake violently. She knew, with a certainty that iced her veins, that the call was the beginning of the end, the sound of the financial siege commencing, proving Ghost's timing was perfect, and that she was already too late to save either the Stone family or the Foundation's moral integrity. The phone rang a second time, a long, piercing sound that cut through the silence like a knife, signaling an emergency far beyond anything Jasmine could contain. She heard a door open down the hall, Catherine returning from the basement, perhaps, and knew in that instant she had only seconds to hide the evidence of her own catastrophic betrayal before Catherine walked into the room and saw the truth of the Foundation's undoing right beside the telephone that was about to deliver the final, devastating blow. The phone rang for a third, inescapable time, and Jasmine felt the adrenaline spike. A choice had to be made, right now, before. The phone rang for a third, inescapable time, and Jasmine felt the adrenaline spike. A choice had to be made, right now, before. She slammed the newspaper clipping and the folded demand note beneath the first large volume of Catherine's tax law binders, a desperate, clumsy attempt at concealment. She snatched the receiver off the hook on the fourth ring, the sound deafening in the sudden silence. "Hello?" Her voice was strained, barely above a whisper. Just as the legal counsel's frantic voice began to spit technical jargon into her ear, the office door swung open, and Catherine stepped through the archway. Catherine was already pale, her eyes tired from the weeks of mounting professional stress, but she looked directly at Jasmine, noticing the tremor in her hands holding the receiver. "Jasmine, what is it? I heard the phone." Jasmine cut her off, turning her back slightly to shield the desk. Her focus narrowed onto the cold corporate voice on the line. The counsel didn't bother with pleasantries. "It's been filed, Mrs. Stone. Massive class action. Thorne went public 10 minutes ago. He's naming the Foundation as a co-conspirator to fraud, alleging that the initial land acquisition deal 30 years ago was predicated on a pattern of organized racketeering and coerced evictions." The air rushed out of Jasmine's lungs. Racketeering. That term wasn't just a civil suit. It was the total annihilation of reputation. A criminal implication. "Jasmine!" Catherine asked sharply, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. "It's the legal team, Catherine," Jasmine choked out, pulling the phone away just enough to mask her side of the conversation. "Tell her everything," she hissed into the receiver, unable to look at the woman who had become her mother. "Tell her about the seizure threat. The media spin, now." The legal counsel obeyed, explaining in rapid fire that Thorne's 47-page complaint was already being distributed to every major news outlet in Chicago, detailing the displacement of 57 low-income families and naming former Stone employees as whistleblowers. The document was designed not merely to win damages, but to freeze all major assets and completely cripple the Stone firm's public standing. Catherine crossed the room, pulling a chair closer, her face now completely white. "Put him on speaker, darling," she instructed, her voice deceptively calm. Jasmine complied, setting the phone down. For the next 10 minutes, the office became a battle room, filled with the devastating details of Thorne's siege. Catherine listened, meticulous and grim, asking pointed questions about corporate liability and damage control. The weight of Margaret's fragmented confessions, the families, the sin, pressed down on Jasmine, making her feel physically ill. She realized that by protecting Ghost, she had allowed him to thrive in the shadow of this larger historical darkness, confirming her worst fear, that the foundation was built on moral quicksand. Then, the second phone call came. This time, it was David's assistant, calling Catherine's cell phone, which was vibrating wildly on the blotter. Catherine snatched it up, her composure finally breaking at the sound of the young woman's voice. "Catherine, you have to get to the new shelter now. It's chaos. Someone, we think it's a coordinated street gang attack, has breached the property. They shattered the main facade. They're destroying the interior build-out, the kitchen units, everything. The ribbon cutting is scheduled for tomorrow. The media is already there because of Thorne. And now they are filming this. It looks like a declaration of war." Jasmine heard the phrase, street gang attack, and the cold terror she felt earlier was replaced by a blistering certainty. Ghost. He hadn't received the $100,000, and he was delivering the ruin he promised. He wasn't aiming for money anymore. He was aiming for the public destruction of her second chance. "David is on his way, Jasmine," Catherine said, her eyes flashing with a combination of parental fury and corporate determination. "You ride with me. We have to limit the damage. We have to prove to the city that this foundation is not a target for violence." The drive across town was a blur of frantic phone calls and silent panic. Catherine, focused on triage, organized security and press statements. Jasmine sat rigid, watching the city lights blur, knowing she was driving straight into a confrontation with the single person who held the key to her total destruction, a key she herself had handed over by compromising the security protocols. When they arrived at the new foundation building, the scene was worse than the assistant had described. The structure, meant to be a beacon of hope, was now a symbol of urban decay. A massive window near the entrance had been smashed, allowing the frigid Chicago air to rush into the lobby. Red flashing lights from news vans strobed across the building's pristine white walls. Police cars were only just starting to pull up. "Stay close to me, Jasmine," Catherine commanded, pushing open the car door. "Don't say anything to the press." But Jasmine couldn't heed the warning. She saw the figures moving inside the shattered lobby, dark silhouettes moving against the internal emergency lights, systematically overturning desks and spraying paint across the finished walls. One figure, taller and broader than the others, stood near the reception area, directing the destruction with slow, deliberate gestures. "Ghost. I have to go in," Jasmine whispered, breaking away from Catherine before the older woman could react. "Jasmine, no! The police are here." "Let them handle it!" Catherine shouted, reaching for her arm. Jasmine shrugged off the grip. "It's my fault, Catherine. I know who he is. I can stop him before he hurts someone." She slipped past the yellow tape, entering the dark, cavernous structure. The smell of aerosol paint and splintered wood filled the air. She moved quickly, her street instincts taking over, low to the ground, moving from shadow to shadow, using the chaos as cover. She found Ghost near the back offices, standing over the shattered remains of the new computer server rack. He held a pipe wrench in one hand and a thick canister of industrial paint in the other. He looked up as she approached, his face a mask of bitter satisfaction. "Look at you, Jazzy," Ghost drawled, his voice carrying the dangerous familiarity of the tunnels, still trying to clean up someone else's mess. Except this time, it's your mess. "Stop this, Ghost," she pleaded, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The police are here. You'll be caught. You will destroy everything we worked for." Ghost laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "We? You gave up the we when you took their silk sheets and their private security. I told you, if you don't pay up, I take the payment in wreckage. And look, the media is here, filming the hypocrisy. This foundation built on lies, using their stolen wealth, trying to save the poor. It's perfect." He lifted the pipe wrench, preparing to smash the remaining electrical panel. "I'll pay you!" Jasmine shouted desperately, taking a step forward. "I'll get the money. Just stop this, Ghost. Don't ruin the chance for 50 kids to have a safe bed tonight." 50 kids? You couldn't even save one family, Jasmine. The ones that built this empire. Ghost spat, gesturing wildly toward the front lobby. "I told you what they owed us. You stole from us, and now you've stolen from them. This is the price of betrayal." A heavy footfall sounded behind Jasmine. Catherine had followed her inside, ignoring the mounting sirens outside. She stood framed in the broken doorway, her eyes wide with horrified comprehension. "Jasmine, step away from him," Catherine commanded, her voice cracking. Ghost's eyes lit up with malicious triumph. He looked from Jasmine to Catherine, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Mrs. Stone," Ghost said, tipping the pipe wrench in a mock salute. "She didn't tell you, did she? How she bought her way into your mansion? She didn't tell you about those little favors she did for us in the tunnels, the lookout work, the cash runs, or the little bit of foundation cash she siphoned off last week just to try and keep my mouth shut about that juicy little file I found about her little escapades? That's what you call integrity, right? You're perfect little student, lying and stealing just like the rest of us street rats." The pipe wrench was raised high above his head, aimed now not at the electric panel, but directly at the fragile skeletal frame of a new youth mentoring desk nearby. Catherine screamed, a raw sound of sheer terror, and lunged forward, physically shoving Jasmine aside just as the heavy wrench came down, splintering the desk into irreparable pieces. Ghost, enraged by Catherine's interference, turned his full attention on the real estate mogul, his face contorted with rage. "You think your money protects you?" Jasmine scrambled back to her feet, realizing Ghost was beyond reasoning. He was now fully focused on destroying the woman who had given Jasmine a new life. She had to act. She launched herself at Ghost, hitting him low and fast, tackling him around the waist just as he swung the wrench again. They fell hard onto the concrete floor, the pipe wrench skidding away into the darkness. "You don't get to destroy her!" Jasmine yelled, grabbing Ghost's wrists. "She's the reason you betrayed me!" Ghost roared, struggling violently against her grasp, his face inches from hers. The sounds outside reached a crescendo as the first wave of uniformed officers burst through the shattered entryway. Ghost, seeing the flashing blue and red lights approaching, gave one final powerful shove, throwing Jasmine against a steel pillar. As Jasmine hit the metal, Ghost turned, grabbing a small, heavy object from his pocket, a heavy-duty utility knife. He slashed the air wildly in a desperate attempt to fend off the approaching officers. Catherine, ignoring the sound of the approaching law enforcement, rushed to Jasmine's side, pulling her up and shielding her body with her own. "Get away from her!" Catherine cried out to Ghost. Ghost stopped moving, staring at the sight of the wealthy woman protecting the street kid. He saw the profound, protective love in Catherine's eyes, And then, slowly, his gaze dropped to Jasmine, seeing not her betrayal, but the terrible compromise of her secret life now fully laid bare. He looked back at Catherine and spoke one last time, his voice low and venomous, intended only for the woman who believed in redemption. "Ask her, Mrs. Stone. Ask her why she needed my protection 3 years ago. Ask her what she did to earn it." Catherine stared at Jasmine, her face a heartbreaking mosaic of horror, betrayal, and deep, profound shock. The truth of Jasmine's compromises, her involvement, and the sheer scale of the deception slammed into Catherine, not as anger at the financial ruin, but as agonizing hurt at the lie between them. A police officer's stern, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" The sound of Ghost's utility knife clattering onto the concrete floor was instantly swallowed by the overwhelming, piercing wail of a dozen newly arrived police sirens, signifying not just the end of the raid, but the violent, irreversible public culmination of both their dark, terrible secrets revealed in a single terrifying moment, leaving Catherine unable to move, unable to speak, forced to look into the eyes of the young woman she loved, now seeing only the ghost of the girl she saved. The air in the newly broken-in shelter site became thick and metallic, heavy with the scent of fear, concrete dust, and the acrid tang of Ghost's sweat and adrenaline. As uniformed officers swarmed the perimeter, securing the arrest and attending to the frantic staff, the violent sensory barrage of the climax gradually gave way to a chilling, sterile reality. Jasmine found herself pressed against a temporary wall partition, guarded by a junior officer, watching the paramedics work on the injured staff member, a young intern whose arm had been broken during the struggle. She couldn't focus on the intern's low, whimpering cries. Her entire existence was dominated by the phantom pressure of Catherine's previous gaze. That look, not fury, but a shattered mirror reflecting the agonizing realization that the safe world she had built around Jasmine was founded on a necessary, unforgivable lie, felt heavier than any physical blow. When the detectives separated them for questioning, the silence in the precinct interview room was deafening. Jasmine's hands shook uncontrollably beneath the scratched laminate table. She answered questions about Ghost's threat, about the security breach, and about the missing funds, admitting to the small, forced compromises. But she meticulously pruned her testimony, excising the deepest roots of her guilt. She never mentioned the 3 years of tunnels, the collective, or the specific felony Ghost used as leverage. That information, if exposed, would not just cripple the foundation, it would categorize Catherine's rescue as an aiding and abetting crime, a risk she could not allow. Simultaneously, 2 rooms away, Catherine sat upright and regal, despite the trauma etched into the deep lines around her mouth. She was questioned not only about the immediate breach, but about the persistent, detailed queries Thorne's legal challenges had introduced regarding the Foundation's solvency and the provenance of its wealth. "We understand you have been under severe public scrutiny regarding the original acquisition of the Lincoln Park holdings," the detective stated, his voice flat. Catherine nodded once, closing her eyes briefly. Decades of meticulously buried ruthlessness were bubbling to the surface, forced out by the venomous combined pressure of an old rival and a desperate street warrior. When the interrogation concluded, David was waiting, his face drawn and pale. He led Catherine to a private conference room where their crisis management team, a quartet of sharp, expensive lawyers and public relations experts, were huddled around laptops, absorbing the instantaneous media fallout. The headlines were immediate, aggressive, and perfectly orchestrated by Thorne's unseen hand. Stone Foundation shelter raid, linked to gang activity, philanthropy built on blood money. The articles not only detailed Ghost's arrest, but aggressively resurrected the 30-year-old allegations of displacement, linking the Foundation's current mission to its corrupt origins. "The leverage is total, Catherine," said the lead attorney, a lean woman named Helena, who specialized in reputation management. "Thorne has tied the Foundation's operational funding directly to the original land acquisition. Furthermore, Jasmine Brooks's compromised position provides a clear ethical exit for you. She admitted to diverting resources, however coerced. If you wish to save the Foundation's legal standing and tax status, we must publicly renounce her involvement." "You claim exploitation! You cancel the guardianship!" The cold, calculated logic of corporate self-preservation hung in the air, a familiar, toxic vapor from Catherine's past. For an agonizing moment, she felt the pull of the old self, the woman who cut losses ruthlessly, who prioritized empire over emotion. But then she remembered Margaret's fractured warnings, the 57 families displaced, the 2 silenced whistleblowers, and the deep, haunting hurt in Jasmine's eyes as she walked away from the tunnels. Catherine had built her wealth on abandonment. She would not repeat the cycle. She looked Helena in the eye, her voice firm, stripped of all artifice. "No," Catherine stated. "Jasmine is my daughter. She was 18 years old and fighting for her life on the street when she made those choices. We do not renounce her. We defend her. We defend the human being, even if it means sacrificing the edifice." David squeezed her hand, a silent affirmation of the monumental decision. Hours later, beneath the cold, hungry glare of spotlights positioned outside the Stone firm's downtown headquarters, Catherine Stone stepped up to a makeshift podium. She was immaculately dressed, but her exhaustion was palpable. She began by addressing the raid, defending the staff, and the safety of the Foundation's mission. Then she faced the microphone and the entire world. 30 years ago," Catherine began, her voice steady but gravelly, "I made a decision guided by ambition and ruthless corporate strategy. That decision, the key land acquisition that founded the Stone fortune, involved a profound ethical compromise. I prioritized profit over people. We displaced residents, and we silenced dissent. That truth has haunted my family and me for decades. The Foundation was created to be my penance, to pay the debt of that original sin." A visible ripple went through the assembled press. This was not the expected denial. It was a devastating, self-inflicted wound. Then she turned her attention to Jasmine. "And regarding Jasmine Brooks," she continued, projecting immense maternal authority, "the actions she was forced to take were those of a child trying to survive a broken system. She was coerced by a dangerous element that operates outside the visibility of our society. I stand by Jasmine. She is not the problem. She is the proof of the problem. If we cannot forgive the actions necessary for survival, then we have no right to preach redemption." It was a powerful, devastating performance, an act of corporate and maternal bravery that momentarily silenced her critics and, more importantly, publicly anchored Jasmine to the Stone family despite her past. Jasmine watched the live broadcast from the silent sanctuary of Catherine's office, tears finally blurring her vision. Catherine had chosen her. She had chosen truth over wealth. The relief lasted precisely 3 minutes. Helena and 2 financial attorneys hurried into the office, their faces grim. The measured satisfaction Catherine had felt moments earlier evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold dread that constricted her chest. "It's Thorne," Helena whispered, setting a document on Catherine's desk. "He didn't just file a fraud case based on the land acquisition. He used your public admission and the compromised Foundation security as a trigger clause." The attorney pointed to a section marked ex parte injunction. "What is it?" David asked, his voice strained. It's a temporary restraining order, Helena said, swallowing hard. Based on the immediate financial instability and the public admission of ethical fraud, Thorne has convinced the court that the Stone Corporation and the Foundation pose an immediate risk of asset flight and money laundering. Catherine reached out, her fingers trembling as they traced the legal jargon. Effective immediately, all accounts linked to the Margaret Stone Foundation and Catherine Stone, personal and corporate, have been frozen pending a full forensic investigation, Helena stated, her voice falling to a horrified whisper. They've locked down everything. They have used the alleged laundering of the $10,000 Jasmine diverted to Ghost, combined with the 30-year-old fraud allegations, to justify a complete financial siege. Catherine felt the floor tilt beneath her. The confession had been her most noble moment, yet it had paved the way for total defeat. The operating capital, the payroll, the investment accounts for the future shelter. Catherine trailed off, unable to form the words. All inaccessible, Helena confirmed. And worse, the Stone Mansion, David and Margaret's home, has been named as a key collateral asset against Thorne's initial claim for damages. We have no liquid assets to fight this. We are financially crippled. The Foundation's mission is totally halted, and everything we own is now held hostage by Daniel Thorne, awaiting foreclosure. Catherine Stone stared into the void of the financial ruin she had just bought with her integrity, realizing that the one thing she thought she was sacrificing, her reputation, was a minor cost compared to the loss of every tangible asset, leaving her beloved family utterly defenseless. 6 months later, the opulent grandeur of the Stone Mansion had faded into a cold, clinical memory, replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of a life rebuilt from the foundations of honesty. The estate, bought for an astronomical price by a consortium led by Daniel Thorne, a final, vindictive victory, was now nothing more than a series of polished, empty rooms waiting for new ghosts. The sale had provided the necessary liquidity to settle the crushing majority of Thorne's legal claims, free the remaining Foundation assets from injunction, and, crucially, keep Catherine and Jasmine out of the crosshairs of a protracted criminal investigation triggered by Ghost's break-in. Catherine Stone stood on the porch of a modest pre-war apartment building in Old Town, clutching a single worn leather satchel. It contained 4 items: the keys to the new apartment, a framed photograph of Margaret and David from 40 years ago, her original business school diploma, and the deed to the tiny, restructured Margaret Stone Foundation office, a former dental clinic, not a gleaming glass tower. The sacrifice had been immense, not just financially, but psychologically. She had traded the armor of wealth for the vulnerability of transparency. "Ready, Mom?" David asked gently, stepping out of the small, rented moving truck. Catherine nodded, the title of Mom now feeling more genuine than any corporate designation had ever been. Ready to earn it back. She thought of the conversation they'd had 3 months earlier, standing amidst the empty mahogany paneling of the mansion's library. Jasmine had been consumed by guilt, believing she had been the catalyst for the family's ruin. "You didn't ruin us, Jasmine," Catherine had insisted then, her voice steady. "You saved us. You forced us to pay a debt I buried 30 years ago. If we had kept that wealth, it would have been tainted forever. Now, we're clean. We're fighting on level ground." The greatest sorrow of the transition, however, was Margaret. The stress of the financial collapse, combined with the media frenzy surrounding Catherine's confession and Ghost's arrest, had accelerated her decline. She was moved, gently and tearfully, to a specialized, state-of-the-art facility outside the city limits, a place Margaret, in her few lucid moments, deemed necessary for progress. Jasmine sat beside Margaret's bed on the final day, holding the old woman's frail hand. Margaret's eyes, clear and ancient, focused on Jasmine. Catherine built the bridge on sand, child, Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. She wanted kindness without justice. That's why it fell. Now, now you must build the foundation. Truly build it. On rock. The kind that stands up to the storms. Jasmine's eyes were wet, but her resolve was granite. I will, Margaret. I promise. Not for the money, but for the principle. For Grandma Rose. Margaret smiled, a deep, knowing smile that illuminated her face, before closing her eyes for a nap she might not entirely remember waking from. It was a blessing and a farewell, giving Jasmine the final, necessary direction. The new Margaret Stone Foundation operated from a cramped, brightly lit suite, now focused less on providing temporary emergency beds and more on direct, systemic advocacy, housing rights, legal support for youth aging out of foster care, and political lobbying against predatory development. They had gone from managing 50 beds to managing 5 critical legal cases, prioritizing impact over volume. Jasmine Brooks, 21 years old and pursuing her master's degree in public policy, was officially the Foundation's Director of Operations. She no longer hid the truth of her 3 years on the streets. She used it. During weekly intake sessions, she would often start by describing the cold ache of the subway platform, the desperate smell of the concrete, and the feeling of invisibility. Her past wasn't a secret burden. It was a badge of experiential authority. Catherine and David, meanwhile, were working side by side in a small consultancy office downtown, attempting to resurrect a clean, ethically transparent real estate investment firm. They were rebuilding their fortune from zero, guided by Catherine's fierce determination to prove that success did not require a moral compromise. Jasmine's transformation was complete. She had faced her 2 greatest fears, exposure and abandonment, and discovered that the consequences, though painful, had forged a stronger reality than the fragile illusion she had desperately clung to. Ghost remained in prison, facing multiple charges. His betrayal had ironically freed Jasmine from his dangerous orbit forever. The culmination of her new purpose came late that November. Jasmine stood on a podium in the grand, echoing chambers of the City Hall, preparing to testify before the City Planning Commission regarding a proposed ordinance on low-income housing quotas, a direct challenge to the type of gentrification that had displaced Margaret's families 30 years prior. The room was packed with community activists, corporate lobbyists, including several from Thorne's firm, watching her with detached hostility. And, in the front row, Catherine and David, radiating quiet support. Jasmine gripped the railing, her heart pounding a rhythm of focused intensity. She wasn't wearing a borrowed suit. She wore the simple, practical clothes of a student and an activist. "My name is Jasmine Brooks," she began, her voice steady, magnified by the microphone. 3 years ago, I slept in the tunnels beneath this city. I operated outside the system because the system viewed me as disposable. I know what it means to be without a voice, without a home, and without hope. I have also seen what happens when powerful institutions prioritize profit over people. I have seen the damage that kind of ruthlessness leaves behind. She looked directly at the commissioners, not pleading, but demanding accountability. My adoptive family, the Stones, learned this lesson at great personal cost. They learned that kindness, generosity, and charitable giving are crucial, yes, but they are entirely insufficient. Kindness is just a patch, a temporary bandage on a systemic wound, she asserted, her voice rising with measured power. The only thing that honors the lost, the only thing that justifies a second chance, is the courage to confront the corruption that makes that kindness necessary in the first place. Jasmine spent the next 20 minutes dissecting the ordinance, using a combination of street-level wisdom and meticulous policy data. When she finished, the chamber erupted in applause. Not just polite applause, but the thunderous sound of genuine recognition. She stepped down, feeling lighter than she had in years. She had used every dark part of her past, every moment of her complicated present, to fight for systemic change. This was the true legacy of the Margaret Stone Foundation, finally built on the rock of truth. Catherine met her at the aisle, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "That was incredible, sweetie. Grandma Rose would be so proud." "I think she might be," Jasmine murmured, leaning into the warmth of the only true family she had ever known. They walked out into the cool Chicago afternoon, the noise of the city washing over them. As they reached the curb, a familiar, sleek black car pulled up. David opened the passenger door. "Where are we going?" Jasmine asked, expecting the small apartment. David grinned, his eyes sparkling with renewed purpose. "We have an emergency. A new cohort of youth needs housing advocates, and we have a policy briefing at the university in 40 minutes. Time to get to work, Director Brooks." Jasmine climbed into the car, looking back at the city hall, the symbol of the immense, oppressive power she was now sworn to challenge. The fight was far from over. Daniel Thorne was still out there. The cost of justice was still high, and the scars of the past would always remain. But Jasmine Brooks was no longer running. She was driving straight into the fray, armed with nothing but her painful truth and the absolute knowledge that, this time, she was fighting for the right things, for the right reasons, on a foundation that could never be shaken.